Our Shared World Learning Lunches are in full flow now. This is number four. And for those of you who've been before, you'll know that they are quite quick and we get a lot done in a short space of time. So I will immediately go on to introduce and welcome our speaker for today. Today we are being joined by Dr. Morgan Phillips. So Morgan works at Global Action Plan and he has been part of Our Shared World for as long as I can remember, and is one of these brilliant sources of wisdom, of reflection, and always has a lot of really poignant things to say about the topics around environmental education. So I'm really excited to hear what Morgan has to say today. And Morgan today will be talking on the theme of not all education for the environment needs to be about the environment. So I'm excited to hear more. Over to you, Morgan.
Thanks, Holly. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to put my slides up. Hopefully everyone can see. Well, so thanks, Holly, and yeah, Happy New Year, everyone. It's great to be here and lovely to see so many people who I recognise and familiar faces. And it's nice actually to go through some of these ideas with you guys, because I feel like you're a kind of audience that I can share these ideas with, and I'd love to get your feedback on them as well. So it's a bit of a work in progress, actually, of ideas and thinking I've been doing at the moment. I've got a TEDx talk to do in February, so I'm kind of working that up, and this is kind of a kind of work in progress towards that. But hopefully it'll be useful. I'm actually going to turn my camera off just because you don't need to see me really. I'm just going to go through these slides quickly, and then we're going to have a time for a little bit of a discussion afterwards. I've got a bit of a question to explore, so I'll just do that. So not all education for the environment needs to be about the environment. The first thing to ask, this is based on work by Hikari Komatsu and colleagues. I've read kind of 4 or 5 papers of theirs now exploring these ideas, but they're basically arguing that these are the 3 mainstream approaches to environmentalism. There's the technological, the cognitive, and the behaviorist. And we've got to ask ourselves, are these working in the modern world when we look at what's going on? For me, no, they're not really. We're making some small progress, I'm kind of terming it reckless incrementalism is what's going on at the moment. We're going very slowly through doing these sorts of approaches. Just to dig into them a little bit more, what these mean by technological. This is quite dominant, obviously, in the UK at the moment. The key thing around it is the behaviour change of ordinary public is kind of framed as being unnecessary because technology will come along and solve us, and save everything. So we're seeing basically that, we've been told that technology is going to bail us out of the crisis, but it looks increasingly unlikely given the scale of the challenge, the speed of technological development, essentially not going fast enough, especially around things like carbon capture and storage, solar radiation management, nuclear power, hydrogen fuel cells, and so on. These things which are supposedly going to save us, they're not, we don't know if they're going to work. We don't know if they're going to scale fast enough. There's huge kind of barriers, both at the local level, the international level, huge kind of geopolitical minefields to be operated or to be solved to make some of these huge technological things work. So we can't really rely on these technological things. If we want to pursue them, if we want to explore what technologies can help us through this crisis, but we can't really rely on them. The next one is the cognitive one, which is really about teaching about the environment, teaching about the climate crisis. So we know how woefully let down we're being on this front. We're not actually learning very much about the environmental issues in our schools, in our communities and society at the moment. And what is being taught is quite often a bit of a sugar-coated version of the truth. And so we know that knowledge, is important. And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't be teaching children about the environment. We should definitely be doing it and being really honest and truthful about it. But the knowledge action gap problem isn't going to go away. We know that knowledge doesn't necessarily turn into environmental action. And so that cognitive approach, it's there, it's not sufficient. And even if we were doing it brilliantly, it probably wouldn't work anyway, fully on its own. But then we have the kind of more behaviorist approach. So this is where we think about nudging people into better behaviors. And quite often this is done by appealing to their kind of self-interest values, and these nudges can actually therefore end up kind of reinforcing self-interest values, and in the process then we kind of weakening our compassionate values or our bigger than self values. I know you've heard about this in the last learning lunch from Common Cause. If we're weakening those compassionate values and those bigger than self values and kind of activating and reinforcing self-interest values, what that does is it kind of undermines the values which create a commitment to environmentalism and social justice over the longer term. And we also know that that we can nudge people into making kind of superficial changes to their lifestyles, but behavioral change methods, they aren't massively effective when it comes to the big changes, either the ones that make a really significant difference. So these kind of three mainstream approaches that I'm sure you all recognize are going on in the world, and they're kind of, it's environmentalism, but you can see how these work in environmental education. When you think about the scale of the crisis and what's happening, what's unfolding, what we kind of, the evidence that we are experiencing kind of viscerally now in the UK, these mainstream approaches on their own aren't working, which kind of begs the question, why aren't they working? So this is drawing again on the work of Hikaru Komatsu and colleagues. And what this map shows is it's a map of countries coded according to how individualistic they are. So you see that the US scores really high, the UK scores really high, Australia, New Zealand, they score really high on individualism, whereas countries such as Argentina, Chile, China, Turkey, they score lower on individualism. And what Komatsu and colleagues found when they mapped individualism against ecological footprint is a trend, in that the more individualistic a country is, and the higher the ecological footprint of the individuals within that country is going to be, which I guess kind of makes sense. Now, they weren't saying necessarily that this is a direct relationship in that individualism causes high ecological footprint. They were showing it was a correlation. But intuitively, I think a lot of us will probably start to think that individualism probably does have a role in causing high levels of ecological footprint. And so there probably is a bit of a causation going on, but the evidence isn't there to prove that yet, but that's kind of what this indicates. So they concluded this. They concluded that the findings suggest that although the independent self has traditionally been the cornerstone of Western civilization and been valorized in other places worldwide during the modern era, rewriting this culturally defined concept of self might now be necessary to move towards environmental sustainability. So what they're arguing is that we need to go beyond those three mainstream approaches and think of a different approach, which is kind of grounded in rethinking this kind of valorization of the independent self, individualism, and so on. So effectively what they're saying is the problem isn't primarily technological, cognitive, or behavioral, it's cultural. And the problem, to be more specific about it, is hyper-individualism. Now, individualism kind of started off as a really wonderful thing. It kicked off in the 1960s. Human beings all over the Western world were freeing themselves from the shackles of institutions and the societal cultural norms that held them back from expressing themselves. It was a really liberating time. People were becoming more comfortable with dressing differently, having different types of relationships, trying different ways of getting intoxicated on a Saturday night. And as a consequence of all this, culture kind of exploded as musicians, artists, filmmakers, writers began kind of experimenting at a pace that had not been seen before because they were sort of free of those shackles. And it was, they tell me, because I wasn't around then, a very exciting, empowering, and kind of emancipating time. But individualism has kind of evolved over the last few decades. It's kind of evolved into this hyper-individualism, which is a different thing, and which for many people isn't quite so thrilling. You can kind of have too much of a good thing. This kind of would be sort of completely freed and very individualized in a kind of hyper way. So at the beginnings of individualism, people were really excited about the future, and they weren't only just imagining different alternative futures, they were able to create them as well. So things started changing, progress happened, people's lives got better, they got more rewarding, more varied, more spontaneous, more kind of delightful. So if you think about it, the 60s looked very different to the 50s, the 70s looked different to the 60s, the 80s looked different again after the 90s. But at some point around the turn of the century, the rate of change seemed to slow right down. And the differences in terms of culture, fashion, music, design between, say, now and 2005, over that 20-year period, the difference between culture now and 20 years ago is so much different to the difference between, say, 1965 and 1985. The rate of change of kind of progress and the evolution of culture has kind of slowed down. So we're just into 2025. We've had a quarter of the 21st century, but culturally, we can ask, has the 21st century even started as a cultural phenomenon? So if you think about it right now, teenagers are wearing the clothes I was wearing in the 90s, and they're spending hundreds, probably thousands of pounds going to see Blur and Oasis. Like, things aren't really moving on massively, and this is a kind of a lack of cultural progress, and extends into film, music, art, comedy, fashion, and kind of into environmentalism a little bit as well. And it's sometimes called the slow cancellation of the future, or retromania. And Mark Fisher did lots to popularize this idea around 10 years ago. It extends as well into politics and environmentalism too, where we keep on kind of doing the same things over and over again because we seem capable of imagining and implementing anything genuinely different. So we're sticking to those three mainstream approaches, the technological, the cognitive, and the behavioral, even though they're not really working. So this individualism has kind of turned into hyper-individualism, and the hyper-individualism is at the heart of the problem. We've gradually become kind of almost exclusively a society of independent rather than interdependent selves. So we've moved from sort of understanding that we exist in harmony with others and work with others, and we're dependent on others, to kind of become this kind of solely independent selves. I mean, I'm generalizing a lot, but that's kind of the trajectory we've been on. And this image, which is from a protest calling for the end of the bombing in Syria in 2015, kind of captures what's happened. The placard says "not in my name" rather than "not in our name." It's kind of the individualism that's going on, and it's quite neat actually that in this particular photo you can see the "we are many" is kind of in the background, which kind of, I think, illustrates a bit of what's going on at the moment. So why is hyper-individualism the problem? Well, there's kind of three reasons. The first is the kind of obvious one: individualistic societies consume more. But then there's two more, which actually I think talk to us about why the solution to the environmental crisis isn't emerging from this individualistic paradigm that we're existing in. The second one is collective action is less prevalent in individualistic societies, and individualistic societies run out of ideas. That slow cancellation of the future idea. So just to go into those a little bit, we've talked about this already, but just to kind of speak to this kind of, I guess, kind of obvious one, individualists tend to consume more because they're seeking to express their individuality through their purchases. They're seeking status symbols that communicate who they are and how they fit into social hierarchies and so on. Individualism also, however, makes us feel lonely, and we consume, therefore, as a kind of salve to ease our feelings of insecurity and disconnection. And there's loads of reasons why individualism drives consumerism, and I'm sure you're very well aware of all those. So that's kind of the obvious one. Individualism seems to be a problem. It seems that individual societies tend to have larger ecological footprints. But there's two sort of second two ideas around this, and kind of what's more important, I think. Collective action is less prevalent in individualistic societies. So when we value the independent self over the interdependent self, we become less inclined to band together. We're just not used to doing it, or we don't like to do it. We prefer to be on our own, be individuals. We're not really comfortable interacting with others or being in groups. That's kind of been sort of downgraded or devalued in society. And the kind of part B of this is when we perceive ourselves to be living in self-interest society, we're less likely to engage in citizen behaviours. So this is this values perception gap idea, which you might have heard about through Common Cause, and it was central to our work on Dirt is Good. So that idea is that basically in individual societies, it's easy to feel alone in your sense of care for others and the planet. It feels like you're in the minority wanting to help, and this acts as a barrier to engagement activities like volunteering, environmental action, campaigning, and even kind of voting in the basic democratic process. So that's the second kind of reason why hyper-individualism is a problem. And the third one is that individual societies run out of ideas, the slow cancellation of the future idea. So contrary to the popular narrative, the story of human evolution is survival of the friendliest, not survival of the fittest. So we're kind of at our most imaginative and creative when we work together. So ideas emerge and spread through the conversations we have. They kind of exist in the spaces between us rather than in our own heads. They're formulated when we have conversations. I mean, how many times have you started an idea, somebody else has chipped in, and something completely new has emerged, which neither of you were expecting? That's how ideas emerge. And the less inclined we are to collaborate, the less value we put on collaboration, then the less we do it, and therefore fewer ideas are generated, and the less distance those ideas travel because we're not talking to each other about them. So we kind of get out of the practice of collaborating and not actually get worse at it. There's a bit of a vicious cycle going on as well. The less we are inclined to collaborate, the less we do it, the less well we do it when we actually do it, and therefore fewer ideas kind of emerge and spread. And the other one is kind of one which I don't know how you experience this, but we spend much of our time working or consuming. And you think about consuming, that's kind of sitting in front of Netflix is consuming. We spend a lot of time doing those things, and we have precious time left over kind of for imagining and creating. So in hyper-individualized societies, we spend less time daydreaming, and it's kind of stigmatized as a bit unproductive and difficult to do. And it's difficult for us to do it given how many distractions we have at our fingertips. There's always another social media post to read or a series to watch on Netflix, and we don't actually take that time to daydream. And so when we're not daydream, because of this, we kind of, when we do get tasked with responsibility to create something new, like a new environmental education program, because we haven't spent time just bored and daydreaming, we struggle to come up with ideas, and then we end up kind of rehashing the old ideas, and we retreat in a kind of formal nostalgia. And this is kind of the same reason why bands today sound like bands 25 years ago, because they're just going around in cycles, and you hear there's very little new music coming out because people are just really just rehashing what's come before. And that's all part of this process, and I think it's probably happening a bit in environmental education as well. So there, just to summarize, those are the three kind of problems, I guess, with hyper individualism. And it's, societies actually cause more, consume more, but it's the individualism kind of blocks progress as well. It's preventing us from coming up with new ideas either collectively or as individuals, and that means that we're kind of stuck with the three kind of mainstream approaches and not really making the progress we need to make. So Komatsu and his colleagues, they argue that these approaches are not sufficient because they do not challenge hyper-individualism, and in fact can reinforce it, especially when you think about some of the ways that behavior change type approaches work. They can reinforce those self-interest values and that individualism. And a recognition of this, I think, is what's driving the mainstreaming of a cultural approach to environmentalism and environmental education. Komatsu and colleagues, they sort of called for this cultural approach and recognized that it's existed for a long time. It's been going since the 60s, really. We've been helping people to connect with each other and to sort of connect with nature and to recognize their interdependencies, but it's never been in the mainstream. And actually, I think what's emerging now, what's exciting, and actually so many people on this call are part of this, that this kind of new cultural approach, which is looking and questioning individualism and consumerism with young people, helping young people to connect with each other, that stuff is starting to emerge, which is really exciting. Global Action Plan, we have this as our kind of mission statement for our education work, our generation action work. Every child leaves schools prepared to act collectively for the good of the people and planet. And that word collectively is really important within this, because what we're doing is we're helping young people to experience what it's like to collaborate. I don't think on any of our projects young people are learning on their own. They're always learning with others, and they're doing projects with each other. They're learning what it's like to collaborate. They're learning what it's like to depend on each other, to depend on the planet, and to have that sense and build that sense of interdependency within them. So they're kind of, through the education we're doing, we're helping them to experience what interdependence is like, so they can start to identify as an independent self rather than an interdependent self. Oh, sorry, an interdependent self rather than an independent self. I'm close to wrapping up now. So when I say this, not all education for the environment needs to be about the environment. What this means is that as well as teaching about environmental issues, which is absolutely critical, if you haven't seen the report that Royal Met Society shared just before Christmas the DfE Commission report on climate literacy in England, then you need to look at it, because it's shockingly bad how bad climate literacy is, and that needs to go up. So we do need that education about the environment. I never say we should kind of abandon doing that, but to actually make progress, we need different forms of environmental education that can help young people to critique individualism and consumerism and start to let go of some of those consumerist values, actually. And then also educations which help young people to feel that interdependence with each other, with the planet, so they don't feel like they are kind of selves, independent selves, and actually they are interdependent. And that's what I see happening. Like I say, some of the people on this call are kind of pioneering this stuff, and it's really exciting. And we hope to see more of it. And that's kind of what is of most interest to me at the moment, is this emergence of this cultural approach, which kind of has the assumption that humans are intelligent, collaborative, and creative. It does think that, you know, the public needs to change its behaviour, and grounded in the idea that a cultural shift away from hyper-individualism towards interdependence is what actually brings sustainability. And I guess we'll have different views on where we're at in terms of how close to the brink of collapse society and the environment is. But I tell you what, I'd rather live in a society which is full of interdependent selves than independent individualistic selves. And so I think the need to do this work, this cultural work, and take this cultural approach is important, whatever lies ahead of us in terms of the environmental and climate crisis. That's me. I think that's around about 10 minutes, hopefully, or a bit longer. But we're going to go on to a question, which we're going to do in groups, which is to really think about where we're going to be in 5 years' time. So think about what environmental education currently looks like, but if this cultural approach, which I'm sure you can think of people who are doing it, Benjamin Freud, Thoughtbox are doing brilliant stuff around this area, Lifefords Learning are doing brilliant stuff around this area. So this stuff is starting to emerge. So that's the question: what will environmental education look like in January 2030, 5 years from now? So I don't know. I think George is going to put us into some groups.
Hi everyone, welcome back. Sorry to pull you out of your breakout rooms. I'm sure you were just getting going in there. So good to see you back. I'm just seeing if everyone's returned now. So first of all, our apologies. We've slightly run over, as is our wont, but I hope you managed to have some discussions around this question that Morgan posed. Does anybody want to share any of the thoughts from their rooms? Is there anybody who'd like to kick us off with some of the thoughts that you came back with on what environmental education will look like in January 2030? Have I got any takers there?
I can go. I can go. That's fine.
Thank you. Nice, brave voice. Lovely. Let's hear what you were talking about in your room.
So we were all talking pretty much on the same topic of basically where it shouldn't be a standalone thing. So environmental education should just be something that all teachers are able to do, they're confident to do, they can see how it links to their different subjects. So not just placing that burden on the science teachers or the geography teachers. I'm from a design and technology background. I think it's really important to teach this within that subject, but also history. You know, you can go through the entire list of subjects. So that's what we were kind of talking about. But then obviously that comes down to time, money, pressure on teachers who are already overburdened. But yeah, it comes down to teacher training and education, I'd say. So that's what we were saying. If anybody else can think of anything else.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Helen. Anyone else want to just share what they were talking about in their rooms? So I'm not sure.
We were talking a bit about kind of citizens assembly models and youth voice stuff, and yeah, making sure that kind of when young people kind of take that action, that they're listened to by leaders, and yeah. Sorry, I did a really bad job of explaining that.
You did, Polly, that was great.
In,
So the
in my room
was...
wants to come in. Yeah, and making it about action and doing stuff, and stuff happening from that action, because young people are fed up of lip service and box ticking by leaders.
Yeah, so action approaches I'm hearing, and also speaking to what Morgan was talking about collective action. It's about doing stuff together. So thanks, Polly. Anybody else there want to share very briefly what they might have been chatting about in their rooms?
Can I just share? I mean, it's a slightly inconvenient thought, but in an ideal world, environmental education won't be a thing. Environmentalism won't be a thing. It'll just be an integrated part of how we educate, which has got the well-being of people and planet at its heart. So that would really be a golden horizon that I would work towards.
That's a great one, Rachel. Thank you. Wonderful. You've got some claps there coming through. If you haven't had a chance to share some of your ideas, or if you want to record some of the things that you were saying, then please do add to that Padlet and we can distribute that along with Morgan's slides. Morgan, thank you very, very much for such a thought-provoking session, and one like many of our sessions deserves much, much more than just a half hour. But that brings me to the last sort of point of today, which is we've got our next upcoming learning lunch, which you're all very warmly invited to. It's going to be on the 4th of February, and we've got Thought Box. Rachel's beautifully framed there in the middle of my screen. So Rachel Musson and is going to come and talk to us about the triple well-being framework, along with Holly Everett, our Shared Well co-chair, and they're going to take us through. I'll read you a tiny bit about what they're going to talk about. So they're looking at triple well-being, resourcing ourselves in a time of crisis. As our schools grapple with the complex, growing challenges of mental ill health, social inequality, and the biodiversity crisis, it's essential to step back and explore a fresh perspective on a future-fit education, emphasising not only what we teach, but the way we live, teach, and learn. So they're going to take us through their simple and transformational framework, the triple well-being, at our next learning lunch. So we really hope that you can meet us then. It's a dash through. I hope it's given you some thoughts and ideas to digest, and just picking up on Morgan's comment, that learning is relational. It's about getting together and talking together about our ideas. So just showing up today, thank you very much for your time, and sharing your ideas is definitely part of that. And Morgan, many thanks indeed for coming along.
Thanks
so lovely to see everybody, and we hope you can make it next time.